In this episode, we will learn 3 rules to create winning attacks in chess, discover the key difference between attacking same side and opposite side castling, and learn why sometimes we can push pawns in front of our own king. I am ChessBrain and I've helped countless players improve their ratings. If you want to start winning more middle games, let's jump in and get started. The first rule we are going to talk about is bring more pieces into the attack. That means that your attack will be much stronger if you bring as many pieces as possible to target your opponent. Always remember, the more pieces involved in the attack, the harder it is for your opponent to defend. At the moment we don't have many pieces involved in the attack. The knight is somewhere on the king side, also this bishop doesn't attack opponent's king yet, both rooks are not so active. Let's see how black has decided to proceed with the attack in this situation. So black started with pawn to b3, quick pawn sacrifice, which I like a lot. In a moment we will see why. A takes b3, and now black starts with knight f2. So the first step is they bring the knight from the king side to attack the opponent's position. Maybe it will be knight e4 hitting the queen, maybe it will be knight takes d3, and then white plays king b1. So this is a prophylactic move right now, and we have king knight b4. So we bring next piece into the attack, and knight b4 attacks the bishop, maybe allows us also to play queen a5 followed by queen a2 check, very powerful threat, and that's why white plays knight c1. So again we have defense in this situation. The bishop, it's time for playing bishop b5, and now next piece is involved into attack. Pawn to g4. Now white has decided to counter-attack the opponent. It's a little bit too late. We capture on d3, c takes d3, and rook f c8. Again, next piece supports the attack. Pawn to f5, and here black plays queen a5. And now white is in huge trouble because we want to take on c1 and then queen a2 mates, or queen a1, depends on how white recaptures. So that's why white has decided to take the knight, and we have rook takes c1 anyway. And in both cases, white loses. If king captures, we have knight takes d3, and really nice fork. And if rook decides to capture, we will have queen a2, and the king is mated. So you're probably curious, what happens if white will not take this knight on f2? Then they will play queen e2. To avoid this fork, we will capture this anyway. Rook cannot capture because of queen a2. So we have king takes c1, and then probably check. And the king is quite alone. It cannot go back, so it will go to d2, knight checks. The king cannot escape further. All these squares are covered with our knights. So king goes back to c1, check, and that's it. King is trapped. The game is over. The second rule is prioritize piece activity over material. In sharp positions where there is a lot happening, it often makes sense to sacrifice a pawn if it improves the activity of your pieces or speeds up your attack. Remember, an active piece can be far more valuable than holding onto material. We are in the position with opposite side castling, and white already advanced to the middle game. All our pieces are really active, and black still has problem with their own pieces. Both rooks are undeveloped, and this is quite problematic for them. So white starts with the pawn to g4. We launch the pawn storm on the king side. Black counter attacks in the middle. It's quite a good option for them. We push e5, knight jumps into the middle, and then we have pawn to f5. And I really like this move. It's very strong. We put pressure on e6 pawn. Maybe we will push the pawn to f6, opening up opponent's king. It's very good. And in addition, we sacrifice the pawn on e5. And the thing is that if black decides to take it, our rook is on the same file, so maybe there will be tactical opportunity. Also, queen takes e5 distracts the opponent from developing his own pieces. but I think that they have to capture this pawn anyway. Otherwise, like I said, these two options seem to be quite strong for white. Black first captured the pawn on f5, we take it back, and queen takes e5. We lost this pawn, but it doesn't matter because we still have initiative, and our pieces are very active, and we continue with bishop g3. Queen goes back to f6, escapes, and then we take the bishop on c6. Black captures, so we traded pieces, and then white plays queen g2. And now black has a big problem because the threat is bishop e5. Rook supports the square, so there will be a strong attack on g7 pawn. And black played queen g5, pawn to h4 with the attack. Queen not only has to protect this pawn on g7, but also protects the bishop on e7. And now it's a very difficult choice because if queen moves to h5, we just win a free bishop. They don't want to do that, so queen f6, but then after bishop e5, the game is over because if queen moves somewhere, it's just mate. Unlike with the opposite side castling, where we can often launch a pawn storm, in same side castling, we cannot push our pawns as freely because we need to keep our king safe. Pushing pawns in front of our king is always risky, so we need a strong reason and a solid support. So if my opponent plays bishop g4, I can play pawn to h3, bishop h5. I will not play pawn to g4 here, because even if he has two attacking pieces on the king side, and I have two defensive pieces on the king side as well to support my king, just in case, I will still not play pawn to g4 because I don't see any good reason for doing that. The only thing would be breaking the pin, but I have very good alternatives, like, for example, pawn to d3, so I'm not interested in pushing g4. Remember, if you want to do that, the reason has to be really strong. Opening up the king is always risky, so keep that in mind. We are now moving to the third rule, attack with tempo moves. When you attack with tempo, your opponent is forced to respond immediately, leaving them no time to counterattack your position. That's the best scenario for us, as it keeps the momentum in our favor. We look at the position with same side castling. Our bishops look at the king side already. Same with the knight here and also queen. All these pieces want to attack, and black pushed the pawns in front of the king. It's very risky, but we have enough pieces to support our king just in case. And black doesn't stop. They play pawn to g4 in this situation with tempo. Now the pawn on f3 is hanging as we attack it twice. So white has decided to trade pieces first, and then they capture this pawn on g4, but this is trade because now we win the pawn on e4, but again it's with tempo. Queen moves, and we have next attacking move queen h4 again with tempo. It forces white to react, so they play pawn to h3, and what do we do now? We push f5, opening the rook with tempo again, because we can take the pawn on g4. Also, we might push this pawn forward, and it also looks very dangerous for the opponent. So they capture, and we take it back. And even though our king is so exposed at the moment, white doesn't have any access to our king. The only possible checks are queen g5 and g3, but I don't think white is interested in losing the queen. So they play pawn to g3, kicking out our queen a little bit. We need to escape, but now both pawns are a little bit overextended here. Bishop g2, knight g5. So this move is to win the pawn on h3. So again, we attack this with tempo. They play h4. We trade bishops, and we have counter-attack. So again, we have this initiative. White captures, check, king escapes. We take on f4, and again, white has to react. We attack with tempo, and this position is completely lost for white. The king is exposed, our pawn is just too advanced. Right now the queen is here, and also other pieces are involved in this attack. and white resigns in this situation. Now let's look at one more example where we combine all three roles to create a powerful attack on the same side, castling. Watch how each role comes together to create a winning attack. We have very strong pair of bishops. Also, the pawn on f4 is very advanced. We will try to push this pawn forward if it's possible. And we will create an attack on the king side. So first what black does is he brings more pieces into the attack. So rook a7, and next we will try to bring this rook to the king side. White attacks the bishop, we escape, and then we trade bishops. And now black plays pawn to g5, opening the king more. We have enough pieces around the king to defend it just in case. And also the reason behind pushing this pawn is very, very strong because we are down a pawn, so complications will be in our favor. Rook b1, and now pawn to g4. So we sacrifice a pawn, but we attack with tempos, and that's something what I like. Alternative would be to play rook g7, preparing it, but pawn to g4 is just faster. We sacrifice this pawn, but we attack with tempos. g4 was with tempo, rook g7 next is also with tempo. So white defends this, and then we play h5, again with tempo, improving the attack on the g4. White captures, and there is a brilliant rook sacrifice. It's check, king captures, we play queen g5, king goes to h1, check again, and again. King cannot go to f1 because then we bring the bishop, king e2, and this will be checkmate, so that's why they have to go back to the corner, and we play rook f1, creating a mating threat. So white tries to survive with some checks, but that's it. After king h6 is game over because the rook doesn't have more checks here. All these squares are well protected by us, and the rook takes h5 threat is unstoppable. To sum up, if you want to create a strong attack in the middle game, bring more pieces into the attack. Prioritize piece activity over material, and attack with tempo moves. In opposite side castling positions, it's much easier to attack since we can freely launch a pawn storm. But with same side castling, we need a strong reason to push our pawns and enough pieces to support our king. In today's lesson, we've covered the keys to create a strong middle game attack. But what happens if you are the one under pressure? How do you handle highly aggressive opponents? Check out my previous episode on beating aggressive opponents. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you there.